Okay, despite what it says on your clocks in front of you, which is 5 to 9, according to mine, I've been reliably informed it is 7 o'clock. Before I open the meeting, can I ask any members or officers in physical attendance with an electronic device to mute it to avoid feedback? Can I ask any remote participants to keep their camera and microphone off unless they wish to speak, and ideally not use the camera facility at all, as this can affect the quality of the meeting. Please be advised that the meeting will be recorded and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting will be added to the Council's website. I can welcome everybody to this hybrid local plan panel, including any visiting members attending remotely and any members of the public. Can I advise that the following staff are in attendance in the Council chamber tonight? We have the Head of Planning Services, the Planning Policy Manager, we have Democratic Services, and we have a Senior Conservation and Design Manager. I will now outline the emergency evacuation procedure. Are you all familiar with that? Good. Are there any apologies for absence?
Have apologies for Councillor Eddie Thomas, with substitute for is Councillor Ben Martin.
Okay. If I can move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July 2021, minutes numbers 140 to 143 as a correct record.
Agreed.
Agreed. Which ones do you want me to sign? And are there any declarations of interest? No. I'll advise the members that the items on the agenda are Part A reports for recommendation to Cabinet. The first item, we have the summaries of the main issues raised in respect of the Swale Borough Local Plan Review Regulation 19 pre-submission consultation. These are in your document pack. Obviously, these are extensive, so this is a sort of tabulated summary of the responses. All the responses are available online. Yeah, should anybody wish to see them. And it is recommended that members note these summaries of the main issues raised in respect of the Swale Borough Local Plan, Reg 19 pre-submission consultation. Jill, is there anything you'd like to say?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Councillor Baldock's already mentioned, is that for this Reg 19 consultation that we undertook earlier this year, we said we would present a summary of the main issues raised, and here you have it in the report in front of you. We had 568 separate contributors making 2,550 representations, and the first appendix in the report sets out the headlines set against the chapter or the policy area, and the second appendix provides a summary of the responses made by statutory consultees and neighbouring authorities. In terms of what happens to the main issues raised, this depends on the next item on the agenda, but it is our intention to ensure that all of the comments are taken into account in any future local plan review stages. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jill. Any comments? Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I'd just say well done to officers for putting it. There's a lot of information that came forward, and to have it laid out clearly in the way that it has been is good to see. It's quite easy to read through. Whilst we're only noting it, I think what most of things that have been said has already been said before we even got to the Regulation 19 stage. And I'm pleased that it has, by the looks of it, the next item on the agenda has been taken into account and realisations have been made that we need to go back to Regulation 18. There's two major things that stand out. I mean, they're all major things, I think, which is why we're having to go back again. But the two major things that I've got some questions around is, first one, on the habitat regulations assessment in table 2, the environment agencies felt there's insufficient evidence to rule out likely significant effects in Faversham and Rushendon, with no imperative or overriding public interest given to justify the proposed allocations of the sites. That just seems to me to be quite a major one, which I'm surprised that we haven't got that evidence when something like that needs to be dealt with. And it would just be good to know a bit more about what is being done about that part of it. The rest of the biggest one, again, is around the highway evidence. There's a lot that has been said there by Highways England and KCC Highways, and it's disappointing again that wasn't listened to in the first place when we said that there was evidence missing. We were told that the evidence was being gathered. It seems to be, from what has been said by both of those agencies, that the evidence may not even be ready. And it would just be good to have an update on what's happening, because I thought that was happening over the summer, and I would have thought we'd be getting traffic modelling work coming to us. So we can just have an update on that. That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. So did we. I can report that we have got the first report in, I think it was literally today, maybe yesterday. So it is being looked at. Yes, it is late, a lot later than we had originally hoped. Just to correct you, we are not taking further action on the basis of not having listened or on warnings that we ignored. We have recognised the responses, which we always said we would do. There are other issues that we've had to take into account as well, and we'll be touching on that in the next item. But if Jill, if you could just comment on the habitat regulations assessment.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, it's not a view we share, but clearly it's something that we need to investigate further, and we are investigating it further with our HRE consultants and with the Environment Agency, with a view to securing an agreed position as we move forward. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no more comments, can I move the recommendation agenda item 4, which is that we note for summaries of the main issues raised in respect of the Reg 19 consultation. Can I have a proposer? Alistair? I'll second. Okay, those in favour, do I have to do this one by vote or no? Okay, those in favour, please indicate. Oh, that's unanimous. So we'll move on to agenda item 5. Okay, can I just clarify? Councillor Whelan is present on the computer system, but due to the nature of the regulations, isn't allowed to vote. So I just wanted to clear that up for anyone. Okay, agenda item 5 is the local development scheme. This shows that we have listened to the responses. It's also a response to the fact that the National Planning Policy Framework has again changed, causing some significant challenges, not just to us, but to virtually every local authority that hadn't just submitted a Reg 19. They've introduced a number of new onerous tasks, which we are seeking to address in this. But it gave us a chance also to reflect on COVID. Obviously, we all know that COVID has had a huge impact over the last year to 18 months. it is going to have an impact going forward, not just in the short term, but potentially into the medium and long term, especially with a number of people who are now suffering from long COVID. And that's going to take a while to factor into policies over the next 5 to 10 years, I think, when we see things develop. So this is an opportunity to reflect on both changes, listen to the feedback, and get ourselves in a stronger, even stronger position for the next Reg 19 when we come round. So we've got a well, local development scheme here ready to go if subject to your approval and Cabinet's approval. So Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, the detail of the proposed programme is set out in the report. We're looking to undertake consultation on issues and options at the end of October, bringing that report to the next meeting of this panel, and then we would undertake consultation on the draft submission plan early next year and submit to the Secretary of State in May. Okay, thanks.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Hunt.
Of course. So from what's been said, obviously we've got some good feedback from organisations, residents, and we're being asked to go back to Regulation 18, which I understand that the changes to the NPPF, and because of COVID, it's the right thing to do. I think we need to make sure that things are done right. And these changes are significant and need to be taken into account. But as you said, all councils are going to be in this position. So any council that is going to be carrying out at the moment a local plan or local plan review, are you saying that they are all going to have to go back to Regulation 18 because of the changes to the NPPF and COVID? Or are they dealing with it in other ways that are just modifications as they're going along?
That's a good question. Of course, we are one of several that have got to, whose existing local plan expires next year. It would be interesting. I don't know if you've actually done that work. It would be interesting to see how other councils are dealing with this. Those who haven't recently submitted a Reg 19, of course, will have the options to take it into account before they submit their Reg 19. Do we have much recent feedback? Jill? James?
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of 1 or 2 other authorities that have held up their plans because particularly of the new NPPF and the requirement to have a vision for a longer term than was originally thought of. And one example of that is Horsham District Council. If you go on their website, you'll be able to see the details there. I'm sure there are other authorities that we could find out from, but there are examples out there and we can supply that to members should they wish to do so.
I think you're busy already, James.
I think, yeah.
Councillor Hunt, you'd like to come back?
Yeah, please. I understand, but I think if things haven't been looked at and we haven't got any of the guidance out yet that I'm aware of, is it come out now? No, it's not out yet. So we haven't got the guidance at all about what implications we've actually got for the changes in the NPPF. And I think to go down the route of starting to say that you've got to go back to Regulation 18 just for those 2 points, I think it's a bit premature. If we're going to say that actually, yes, we have listened to what people have said and recognise that we do need to go back to Regulation 18, then that's completely valid. And I think that is the right route to do. We have listened. They have been things that have been said in the past by various people, CPRE, parish councils, residents, and members. And I think to go back to Regulation 18, to do a proper job, to hear what everyone has to say and get proper issues and options put forward to them is the right thing to do. And it is a shame that you're not accepting that that is the case. I think by saying going back to Regulation 18 and doing it, you are accepting it, and I'm pleased to hear that. One concern I do have in all of this is the timetable that's been set out, and I don't believe that we could go back and do a proper job with the time that has been set out. I think to go back to do a Regulation 18, going back from what believe we have to then look at all the SLA. We may have extra sites that are going to need to come forward because of the changes to the MPPF. Once we actually find out what detail that is going to be needed. And to say until we've got all this evidence then back from traffic modelling, what's happening with government and the MPPF, I can't see how we've got time to be able to pull it all together in this time and do a proper job and listen to what's being said.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Gould.
Is part of the problem with that we have is that in order to get a local plan review through in the timescale needed, things have to be just done when it's not perfect. If we wait until everything is perfectly lined up, the situation will then have changed again. So I think that there comes a point where we just have to push on with this, and I'd be supportive of this strategy. There's been a lot of discussion. It's not as if we're starting this Regulation 18 from a blank slate. There's a lot of information. It is out there, and so I think we can move at the pace that is suggested, and that is to some extent dictated by the need to actually try to get a local plan in place in the timescale that has been set for us. So I would be supportive of this approach.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. And of course, at all times, we are monitoring, reviewing and assessing the situation as we said we would, and as we're demonstrating tonight. Councillor Bonney.
Cheers, thanks. Well, over the years of sitting on the local plan panel, all I can say is there's a constant moving feast, and you can't say, well, this is the best time, or we'll wait, it might be better in 6 months' time. We've been clearly set timeline by government in we have to do a 5-year review, and also the planning inspector was very clear what we had to do and set that out. So we have to get on with it, in my view, I'm afraid.
Can I just check that Councillor Horton can hear us now? I'm seeing a message saying he's having trouble hearing. Can we just make sure that people are able to hear? Right. Any other questions? Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I quite agree with the timetable that's been laid out. I think it is possible. It's going to be difficult. We know that. We know that we're having to put officers under a bit of stress to get this done in the timeframe that's set, but it does tell you straight away that maybe 5-year reviews as set by government are too tight. This review will have taken the best part of 6 years. So it does tell you if you've got a review every 5 years and it takes 6 years to do a review, the simple math says it's not possible. We have to get on with it. This is the timetable that we've got. We need to go back to Reg 18 for the reasons that have been outlined, the NPPF being one of them. As ever, the goalposts with planning are always shifting. And if you do wait, the goalposts will shift again, and they will probably shift 2 or 3 more times before you get to going to a submission if you delay any further. So I think it's the right plan. It's the plan that we have. Let's get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. If there's nobody else, I'll move a recommendation. Move that the local development scheme Appendix 1 to this item be recommended to Cabinet for adoption as the current programme of the Swale Borough Local Plan Review. Those in favour? And those against? That's Councillor Hunt.
And could it be noted that I'm against the timetable, not actually going back to Regulation 19? 18.
Yep. Okay. In that case, we'll move on. That has passed. If we can move on to agenda item 6, which is the Swale Local Heritage listing criteria. This is part of our heritage strategy that the council supported last year. I think this is a really exciting development. It's what a lot of people have been asking for in the past, and we've moved forward on it. And I'll hand over to Jamil, who's been doing a lot of work on it.
Thank you, Chair. So what we've got today is the listing criteria for local heritage list. And this is part of the adopted Action Plan 1, which comes from Adopted Heritage Strategy from April 2020. And we had a public consultation on listing criteria. We received quite a few responses, 13 responses, and we've reviewed all the responses and incorporated them in the listing criteria document. The listing criteria document is included in the papers. And what I would like to explain today or elaborate further is that I have reviewed the listing criteria document yet again and identified a few points that I'd like to table to local plan panel for us to agree few more changes to the listing criteria. So if on page 1 of Appendix B, if you go to item 5 under types of heritage in Swale, that item says local views. Swale has downland and coastal views. And my manager, Simon Algar, and we had a long discussion about this, about including local views as local heritage list. But we feel that in Swale, local views are more related to landscape and scenic beauty. And if we were to even look at local view corridors, like they're done in London or other areas, it would require a separate set of policy to support this. And it would not necessarily be aligned with local heritage that we are trying to record and protect here. So I think local views, although it's a very good point, but it does not have place in local heritage listing criteria. And I think we should take that out from there. Moving on to page 3 of the document, item 10, the third bullet point, it says buildings that were erected more than a century ago. Now, we've had some responses and some late representations, and there are some very good examples which date from the 60s and the 70s, which is still half a century ago. So I think over here we should change the sentence to read buildings that were erected within the last century. And that would help us to identify, for example, the post office building in Faversham that was built in the 60s, but it's a good example of a local building, and we will be able to incorporate a lot more buildings and structures related to local history. Going down furthermore, under the same point, buildings that were erected within the last century, there's the second last point which says residences of priests and other religious leaders. And I think that can be quite contentious or could only, be related to specific groups. So I think we need to generalize that, and we should also be open to identifying public figures like people who set up the local brick industry or were involved in local paper manufacturing. So we would like to change that to residences or buildings.
Which bullet point is this?
This is item 10. Item 10, it's the second last bullet point. Yeah. So we would like to change that to residences or buildings associated with notable public figures. And we've kept the word national and local out of the description because we want to encourage local figures to be commemorated. And that's the proposed change there. Moving on to item 12. We would like to, it says, is it a good early example of a particular technological innovation in building? And we would like to add the word structure as well over there. So building / structure, type and technique. And this is especially because there are a lot of good examples of early engineering technological innovations. There's viaduct, there's engineering spans. So that's one change we'd like to do in this location. So those were the additional changes that we would like to put forward for listing criteria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jamil. So we've got 4 proposed changes there. I'll go through each one so that people can talk on them. Monique, did you want to speak on a specific or on the whole thing? Okay, well, we'll start with the first one, which is on page 47, types of heritage in Swale, to remove item number 5, local views. So Monique, do you want to start on that one? Or is that not one of them? Yeah.
Yeah, so it is one of those. So if we take that out, are we, because I suspect what you're saying there is that it's to do with buildings and structures, and the landscape is more to do with natural environment and ecology, etc. Can we cover that as a policy listing, bring that forward to this committee as an item?
I was going to ask the same question. James, can we cover that in another policy, landscape policy, or?
Chair, I think there are policies already in the adopted local plan, and obviously you've got the new policies that you were looking as part of the local plan review with regards to landscaping. Obviously they'll be coming back to this panel as we move forward with Reg 18, Reg 19 documents as well. So you'll be seeing that as we move forward.
I can think of some areas where they might be AONB or they might be designated local countryside gaps, but nothing that would, I mean, I can think of some areas where there's like rolling valleys, but they haven't got a specific protection and they are important features of the landscape.
Can I just?
Yeah, come in, Jamil.
I think this can be covered under landscape characterization appraisal.
Right.
And that's ongoing right now.
Oh, okay.
So I think it has a better place over there.
Right.
And because that would be material consideration, it can be better handled under landscape characterization appraisal, because then it covers all forms of landscape. It covers orchards, it covers blossom areas, it covers everything in terms of landscape and natural beauty.
Do we know the timing of that roughly? Sorry, Jamil. Landscape appraisal.
I think it'd be coming back as part of the main document, wouldn't it? So if we wanted to change, can we look at that and report back to a future meeting?
Chair, I think if members maybe recognising the fact that we do landscape appraisal work, and there is I can't remember the actual title at this very moment, but if you go on our website, there's a landscape character assessment study. I need to double check, but I'm pretty sure it was relatively up to date. I'm sure we can update it further and sort of bring back back to the panel.
I think it's all right doing the assessment, but this is the next step, because this is like a local listing, isn't it? And I think what we're saying is having effectively a local listing for the landscape features.
Basically, it's if there are views that people feel are particularly precious or valuable, they may not be part of a larger landscape, but they might be I've thrown as an example the view around Lower Halstow Wharf and Church and the lane there. Now, that may not form any part of a landscape character assessment, but it is an important view that you might want to have given some degree of recognition. And I can see why it doesn't really fit into the heritage. I'm not sure it fits into the landscape. So I'm not sure I think it's possibly a bit too tricky to answer tonight, but we can come back to the next committee with a comment on it. Let's give you time. Is there anything you can say now, James, or would you prefer to come back?
I prefer to come back, but I'm pretty sure we're sort of covering it off, but we can tweak wordings in policies, etc., to make sure it reflects what members are asking for.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Hunt, is this on the local views?
Yeah. I'd other bits to say around that, but I'll add it to this because it's relevant, I think. If we've been asked to remove that, we've also got in there green spaces, landscapes of local significance, etc. And it was something that I think one of the parish councils raised as having areas and looking at areas rather than buildings. If we're saying that we're not looking at landscape reviews, I wonder how we can then have green spaces and landscapes of local significance in there. Because I was actually quite pleased that all these things were in there.
Yeah.
That we were going to be looking at. And the thing that I was going to raise is that the whole document seems to be aimed at buildings. When you look at the selection criteria, I think it says there, it doesn't say about buildings there, but through the documents, it says everything about buildings and nothing about land or etc. But then goes on to say about open spaces, green spaces, landscape of local significance, local views. So it seemed to be lots of different things being mixed in there, but almost like they've been put in afterwards, but the whole document not picked up with it's not just buildings. So it either needs to all be removed or needs to be changed to include it.
Thank you. Can I let, yeah, just before you come in, Jamil, also on the other side, there is that the heritage assets should fit one of the general principles of selection, and that is it does mention landmark qualities and designed landscape interest. So if you could just clear this up for us, Jamil.
There's a difference between landscape and local views. Yes, we want to identify the landscape. For example, the War Memorial in Faversham is one of the prime examples of a green space, which is a perfect candidate for local heritage listing. And there are a lot more green spaces and landscapes, which if they are not designated and they are of local importance, we would like to include them for their local significance. However, views are a different aspect. If you really go, like, view is something that you standing at a point and you can view a vista, or you have a view across to the sea. Now that has not much to do with heritage unless, and well, it's not fully correct, but within a conservation area, the views are anyway identified. But if we are looking at long distance views or local views, which are specific to Swale, they would largely be around scenic beauty or views across landscape or views across agricultural land. And that view across may not cover anything of heritage importance or of local importance. And if it does, then the view becomes irrelevant. That item, whether it's a building, structure, milestone, landscape, orchard, that would make the cut in local heritage list. But the view itself, the view corridor, how does that become a material consideration in terms of development requires a completely separate set of policies. And that is why I think it's important that we remove it from local heritage list. However, that does not mean that we are removing landscape or green areas, because heritage is not just built form, it's everything that's valuable to the community, to people who live here. So that's my answer to you.
Sorry, I should have.
I'm not sure if I'm now confused. Yeah, because I mean, I can think that certainly around some of my villages, the landscape is reflective of what it is and its history. So it would be agriculture and it'd be orchards, the hedgerows that sit within it, and some of them are extremely long distance views, including over to Essex. So you've got that role of the countryside. It's a geological feature, but equally it is as a result of our heritage and the way the land has been managed. So which is it?
Councillor Martin, I'll let Jamil come back on all this.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm slightly easier actually. I'm just thinking in terms of number 2, the green space and landscapes of local significance, is that not a replication of local green space designations in itself? And in terms of views, I quite agree. They're not really necessarily heritage. There are aspects that could be. For example, the age-old one of you should always be able to see the spire of St Mary's Church from Brenley Corner in Faversham, or you should be able to see the spires of other churches in other villages. But again, that can be covered in other ways. So I'm quite happy with the amendment that's proposed, but just concerned that we might be replicating ourselves.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, and thanks Jamil for the explanation. I do get it. I do understand now about the view, and like exactly that point, you can have a view of a church, but that's protected by some other form of policy rather than having to be in this part. So I do get it. But so in that instance, because of green spaces and landscapes, there is wording in here. So the selection criteria on page 47 still says the designation of local interest shall apply to a building that meets one or more of the criteria. So I think that's where things need to be altered slightly to include open spaces and landscape, and yeah, not including the views.
Sorry, where's that proposal?
That one is in the selection criteria, which is on page 47, and it says the designation of local interest shall apply to a building. So that's not strictly correct. And that's just one example. I think there's others within there that it all seems to be gearing towards buildings only when it's not.
So you're proposing that should apply to a building or landscape?
Yeah, as Jamil feels is needed.
Okay, we all happy with that one? Okay. Building, landscape or structure? Yep. Alistair, sorry, Councillor Gould.
I was just wondering whether an example of the green space that would be a heritage ash would be something like a cricket field, where actually the setting of the cricket field with the trees around it actually is heritage as much as well as being a green space. So there's a dual, if you think of the Faversham cricket ground, for example, there is that setting, that the trees around it. Something like that might be sort of thing might be considered as part of this. So we just was wondering whether that was the sort of thing that was in mind.
Okay, before I go to Jamil, I'll chuck in one last thing so that you can sum up for us. There are some views which are mentioned in books or in poems, and there's a famous one. So famous I've forgotten it. That's there's a view out of London that's mentioned in a poem, and it's still a place where people go and they appreciate it for the view rather than the fact they can still see cars in it. And you can have a view which is important, it reflects the heritage, but as Councillor Bonney said, it can stretch a long way. And it's not because of all the buildings that are in it, or even all the green spaces that are in it. It's the fact that you can stand at one place and see another. And if there were, if there's a concrete tower block put in the way, that view would be lost. So in that way, I can see it's not about the landscape, because the landscape itself may not be special, but it's the fact that you can see from, say somebody put a wall along the swale when you couldn't see Sheppey, then you'd have lost that view of the island, and that would be, I think, apart from a load of other problems, that would be a heritage loss. So that was how I was kind of seeing local views, but we'll hand over to you now, Jamil, to sum everything up. St Paul's to the Houses of Parliament was not the one I was thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with what you've just said. Yeah, and we'll make these changes to include building, landscape, and structure. And going forward from after adopting the local heritage listing criteria, we've included way forward flow charts where we intend doing pilot study, because we need to test this listing criteria, how well it will work, and how we can work within our existing resources, and how much volunteers we can include, how much engagement we can have with the parish
No,
council.
we're still just on the local views.
Sorry,
We're still just discussing the local view change.
sorry.
Can we, if we adopted the local views, can we then put quite some criteria against it, which would make it more specific? No, I'm getting.
If we adopted local views, then the criteria related to that is already covered under conservation area designation. It's not something that will add, it will not benefit local heritage list in terms of, it'll just be an add-on without much benefit. If it's in a conservation area, it's already covered there because, like Martin said, it's due to the church spire or the built form, and that's already covered in a conservation area.
Yeah, some won't be in a conservation area. Okay, Jane, Mr. Freeman or Jill? Jill.
Yeah, just to say that the PPG, the planning practice guidance, does actually provide a definition of a non-designated heritage asset, and this does not include views. So with it,
I don't think we should ask that.
what I think would be a good idea is if we go away and have a look at how we can protect views.
And bring that back as an amendment in the future. We can adopt it tonight without, but bring it back as an amendment when we've got a definition in the future. I'm asking if that's possible.
Yeah, it may be that protection of views sits better within a different policy approach, but we'll
Just asking if we can amend this in the future, or does it stay static until it's gone through a full review?
I would have thought so, Chair. One other option is, if we can do it quickly, is that you get agreement for delegation in consultation with yourself. That's another option if that's worthwhile.
Okay, is it, are people agreeable to that? Does everybody hear what we said? Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll adopt that one subject to delegation. Is this on local views?
No.
Good.
59.
Well, because we're going on to 49. We've got 4 proposals here, so we're going for each 4 of them. 10 bullet point 3, buildings that were erected more than a century ago. I was a bit confused with this one because the proposal is that we change it to within the last century. But we also want to protect those well older than a century ago. So that proposed change, I don't think captures what we want. Would buildings that were erected more than half a century ago? That covers the 70s.
It just about covers the 70s. But the thing is, in architectural interest, if we read point 1 to 6, it covers various time periods under architectural interest. And point 6 covers structures, buildings, landscapes after 1945. And we don't specifically have we haven't mentioned the 60s or the 70s at all in our thing, but because it gets covered by structure built after 1945. And this further clarification under point 10 to include within the last century, it goes back to 1921. So 1921 to 2021. I think that gives us a good broad parameter to include some modern buildings. And it won't be just because it was built in the last century. It'll have to also satisfy other features for its significance, like association with an architect or specific feature, or, you know, there are lots of other things within the listing criteria which it'll have to satisfy, not just because it's built in the 70s. So that's why this amendment is proposed.
But do you want to remove more than a century ago? You're proposing that we remove the buildings that were erected more than a century ago, such as forges? Or do you want to keep them both? Is it more than a century ago and within the last century?
We just wanted to make an emphasis on within the last century, because buildings more than a century ago are covered in greater detail from point 1 to 6, 1 to 5.
But are much tougher. What about if we just said, buildings that are prominent in the life of the community, or buildings that have been prominent in the life of the community, when you're not limiting it to time?
Yeah, I think that would probably be much better to say buildings that were prominent in the life of the community, and remove the date aspect of it. And then the date aspect then gets referred to by point 1 to 6. Would that help?
Yes, I think. But I will check with members. Ben, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I was just going to make a slight change to the wording to make it easier and nice and quick and easier. Buildings that were erected within the last century or earlier covers all bases, gets us everything we want, and just nice, quick and done.
But mine was shorter. Buildings that have been prominent. Because if you say within or before, you're just saying everything, aren't you? Buildings that have been in the life of the community. Buildings of significance in the life of the community. Was that what sounded in my head? Yes, carry on, Councillor Bonnie.
In the list, whether they're however old they are, we had gatehouses. Sometimes we've got gatehouses over time get into security, but they are significant.
Jamil on gatehouses.
I think buildings that have been prominent in the life of the community, that along with the significance of the building going back to point 1 to 6 of architectural interest and of historic interest, combine that, then I think we would get good stock for local heritage list. And that's the purpose of listing criteria, to be able to satisfy not just one point, but several points. And I think buildings that have been prominent in the life of the community would be the way forward.
Okay.
And can we add gatehouses? Yes, we can, if we're agreeable. So are we agreeable that we change this to buildings that have been prominent in the life of the community and also including gatehouses? Are we agreed to that? Excellent. The next one is residence of priests or other religious leaders, which it's being proposed is replaced with buildings associated, and I think I missed a word out, because I've got buildings associated with local figures. It was a word I missed out there. Public.
Residences or buildings associated with notable public figures.
Notable. Yeah, have we agreed that one? Excellent. And I trust we are okay with number 12, innovation in building structure and type and technique. Yep, excellent. Any comments on the thing in general? Councillor Hunt.
It's so now we've sorted out landscape and buildings and everything. I'm going to throw something else in. What does the blue heritage, so our waterways, seas and everything fall under? Because obviously there's a lot of heritage around the Swale and the creeks. Would that be falling under landscape or something else?
That's a very good point, and we're trying to organize how we go about what we refer to as movable heritage. And a lot of it gets covered within the setting or conservation area, but it's a very tricky one, but this is something we're working on. And at this point, I don't think it's relevant for local heritage listing at this point. It may make the cut in the future, but we need to do a bit more study on movable heritage. And we have had some responses where they have asked the same question, and we are working on that.
And one last question. It's just that a number of the respondents submitted candidates that they'd like to see. But I don't think it's listed actually on this document. Is it? It'll just be good to see what that list is at some point, if that's possible.
It's included as Appendix A.
Is it? So let me just go back up.
No, I think Councillor Hunt means specific nominations that were made by certain. But I think that's something, that's the next stage, isn't it? To look at those particular listings. Okay. But are they available online yet, or are we looking at? They'll be available in the responses, won't they?
Yeah, they are within the, because we got literally one-liners, and there were some which were longer that I've included. I think most of them have been included almost verbatim. But yeah, I mean, we can make them available. They are.
Yeah, it's just to know what those buildings that people have got an interest in, because if parish councils and that have mentioned areas, it'd be good for us to know exactly what they are.
Yeah, because literally, like where it says, for example, Hartlip Parish Council, no comments on the proposed listing criteria, general support offered. So the literally one-liner would have been that, oh, we really encourage you. So those. And where there were more detailed responses, they have been included almost verbatim within the Appendix A.
It's more sort of just, I'll try and explain a bit more. For instance, on Iwade Parish Council, they're on page 44. So they said there that it's been submitted 3 possible candidates for nomination. And it's those 3 candidates that would be good to know. So not the whole response of them necessarily, but just those exact buildings or landscape that they've raised. If there's a list of them.
Yeah, sure. I can give you that list. Majority of buildings or structures that were submitted for nomination, which we were not asking for, were actually already statutory listed. So we will not be including them on local heritage list.
Right.
But yeah, I can definitely make that list available for you. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and you wanted, oh, sorry, Councillor Bonny.
Yes, so rising from that, I mean, presumably quaysides will be covered anyway because they're fixed, and although it's a blue asset, effectively, it's a fixed one. And the other one is, when can we nominate? When can we start nominating?
Well, Jamil's just about to go on to Appendix C and the way forward, so she'll answer that question now.
As soon as we have our listing criteria adopted, we're going to start inviting nominations. And in order to test the waters and to be able to have a smooth process, seemingly smooth process of developing a local heritage list. We intend doing pilot studies. So we've been talking to various heritage societies, and Faversham Society is really, really keen on helping us on this. So we might take up Faversham Society with their volunteers to help us developing local heritage list for Faversham. And we want to test some waters within rural areas as well. And we've done a bit of background study, and we've identified 200 structures, milestones, landscape areas, borough-wide. And I think once we start inviting nominations, we might end up with about 500 to begin with, borough-wide. That's our estimate at the moment. So our first step is to do pilot studies, urban areas, rural areas, and then after the basic shortlist is done, then basically me will be driving around checking how relevant it is and how it fulfills the criteria. And then we want to have an assessment group, which would comprise of his representative from KCC, Historic England, Cabinet, local council, and then they would be the deciding factor on what makes the final cut, and that list would be published, and lessons learned from this exercise would be rolled across borough. And so far, whoever we've spoken to within parish council, especially the ones who have responded, are very keen on getting started. They're very keen on, there's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of like, please tell us, when are you starting nomination? We want to do it. So we're really hoping that we'll get a very good response and we'll be able to roll it across quickly.
Okay, before I call on Councillor Bonney, you'll see the appendix. Now, I'd just like to confirm that we're working to the dates on the blue lines and what the dates on the green lines, because the blue lines would have us able to collating the final list in April 22, going out with lessons learnt with nominations on a wider basis next summer. But if we go by the green lines, we won't be doing anything for about 2 years, 3 years.
This is just to cover all the bases.
Okay.
It's a guesstimate at the best. Our aspiration is to stick to blue lines, and until we get started, it'll be really difficult to predict how long does it take to definitely say that we're locally listing these 20 buildings or these 200 buildings. So it's an estimate of the time required, but we are doing our best to stick to the blue line timetable.
Lovely. Councillor Bonney?
That group of rural areas, how fixed is it in the pilot ones? Can I add?
Totally fixed. It's what we agreed previously. Anybody else? Okay, so that's really good. Thank you, Jamil. An excellent report. Really good to see this progressing. So the recommendation is to provide feedback to assist the Council's Cabinet in agreeing the final version of the local heritage list listing criteria for adoption and publication. Are we in favour of that? I'll move that recommendation. Those in favour? That was carried unanimously. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, officers. Thank you, members and members of the public and officers on the screen. And see you all next month.